Imagine waking up in the dead of night. The house is completely silent, your room is pitch black. But as your eyes adjust, you realize you aren't in your own bed. You are standing up, your muscles are tense, your heart is also pounding, and in your right hand, you feel the cold, heavy grip of a survival knife. You look down, your hands are wet. It is dark, but you can tell that it's dark red. You follow the line of sight from the blade to your bed in front of you, and your brain violently short circuits. Lying there is your best friend, your closest confidant, your twin sister, and she is bleeding out from the catastrophic wound to her neck. On September 29, 2021, at exactly 4:40 a.m., a frantic 911 operator in Texas picked up a call that would puzzle the legal system and also horrify the public. This would also tear a tightly knit family into pieces. On the other end of the line was a 17-year-old, Benjamin Elliott. His voice was frantic, a hyperventilating mess of the raw terror and confusion.
I just killed my sister. Oh my God.
Okay, tell me exactly what happened.
I thought it was a dream. I took my knife and I stabbed her. Please, I don't want her to die. I'm sorry.
The operator, accustomed to the cold detachment of calculated killers or the hysterical grief of accidental shootings, tried to make sense of the teenager's words. Benjamin wasn't running. He wasn't even hiding the weapon. By the time the first police cruisers screeched to the halt outside the suburban home, the body cam footage captured a scene that defined every typical homicide case. Benjamin was on his knees on his twin sister's Meghan's bed, frantically pressing his hands against her neck, desperately performing chest compressions while sobbing uncontrollably. The floor was also slick with blood. A large survival knife belonging to his father sat nearby. Meghan Elliott, just 17 years old, was losing her life, and her twin brother was the one who had taken it. But now it was what Benjamin had told the detectives in the interrogation room just hours later that turned this from a tragic domestic homicide into one of the most polarizing medical legal mysteries in modern history. He didn't actually deny holding the knife. He didn't deny striking the fatal blow as well. Instead, he looked at the investigator's eyes and said something completely unfathomable. "I was asleep, I woke up, and the knife was already in her." Now, Benjamin Elliott claimed he was a sleepwalker. He claimed that his mind was trapped in a deep, unconscious dream world while his body executed a flawless, brutal, and lethal assault. For the detectives sitting across from him, it sounded like the oldest, cheapest excuse in the book. A desperate plot by a teenage monster to escape a lifetime behind bars. But as the investigation deepened, forensic experts, sleep neurologists, and a desperate pair of grieving parents would uncover a medical history so bizarre that the line between the cold-blooded murder and a biological betrayal began to blur out completely. In many homicide cases, investigators try to look for a motive. They dig out into text messages, search histories, school arguments, or hidden resentments. They look for the spark that caused the explosion. While with the Elliott twins, there was absolutely nothing. Benjamin and Meghan were inseparable. Born just minutes apart, they shared the unique, almost telepathic bond that often characterizes identical and fraternal twins. They went to the same school, shared the same friend groups, and were universally described by neighbors, teachers, and even relatives as incredibly close. There was actually no explosive screaming matches, no underlying sibling rivalries over money, relationships, or parental attention. Now their mother, Katy Elliot, would later take the witness stand, tears streaming down her face, testifying that her twins got along beautifully. As it turned out, there was simply no reason on earth for Benjamin to want his sister dead. But while their waking relationship was full of warmth and normalcy, Benjamin's sleeping life was an entirely different story. Because since he was a young boy, Benjamin had been plagued by parasomnia, a category of sleep disorder that involve abnormal movements, behavior, and perceptions while falling asleep. Now, to his family and friends, it was almost a running joke. It was just a quirky trait that Ben had. Also, later during the trial, a childhood friend of Benjamin's named Anand Kumar took the stand to recount a bizarre incident from middle school slumber party which had happened years earlier. The boys had stayed up late playing video games and finally had crashed. In the middle of the night, when Anand had woke up and saw Benjamin sitting on the couch, aggressively eating a donut, Anand spoke to him, but Benjamin didn't respond. His eyes were open, but they were completely vacant, staring into the middle distance. The next morning, Benjamin had absolutely no memory of eating the donut or even getting off the floor, while his sister Elizabeth also testifies to the lengthy history of nocturnal wandering. Benjamin would get out of his bed, walk through the hallways, and mutter unintelligible phrases and rearrange items in the house, completely being unconscious. To the human brain, sleep is not simply a toggle switch between on and off. It is a highly complex, layered neurological state. When we sleep in our normal, healthy lives, our brains experience a state called sleep paralysis during certain cycles, particularly during REM sleep, to prevent us from physically acting out our dreams. If you dream that you're running, your brain paralyzes your legs so you don't sprint face first into the bedroom wall. But in non-REM sleep disorders, particularly during deep, slow wave sleep, a catastrophic glitch can occur. The brain's motor control center wakes up, allowing the body to move, walk, and manipulate objects, while the conscious, rational mind, the part that holds your morals, your memories, and your identity, remains entirely dead to the world. And on the night of September 28, 2021, that neurological glitch would turn fatal. Now, the prosecution's case against Benjamin Elliott wasn't built on a lack of empathy. It was built on a timeline of digital data. In the 21st century, the most reliable witness in any murder trial is almost always a smartphone. Our phones, every single swipe, every click, every second the screen is illuminated, creating our digital footprint of our conscious mind. Later, when the digital forensic analysts pulled the data from Benjamin's phone from the night of the killing, they found something that seemed to shatter his sleepwalking alibi into 1,000 pieces. Because on that night, Benjamin did not go to bed early. In fact, throughout the late night hours of September 28 and into the early morning of September 29, his phone was buzzing with activity. He was actually actively scrolling through the internet, browsing websites, and interacting with apps. He was also wide awake, operating his phone just like any other teenager suffering from insomnia. And according to that data, his phone finally went completely inactive at a specific time in early morning, and it stayed inactive for exactly 24 minutes. At the end of that 24-minute window, the phone was used again to dial 911. For the state prosecutors, this timeline was an absolute smoking gun. They argued that it is neurologically impossible for a human being to put down their phone, immediately drop into the deepest and most complex stage of slow wave sleep, formulate a complex plan to walk into another room, locate a father's heavy survival knife, execute a precise and deadly stabbing, and then waking up just as the crime concluded, all within this tiny 24-minute window. He was awake, the prosecutor argued fiercely to the jury. He knew exactly what he was doing. He walked into his sister's room with a deadly weapon, took her life, and when the gravity of what he did finally hit him, he fabricated the perfect medical excuse to save his own skin. Now, the state painted a picture of a calculated killer who used those 24 minutes to commit an international act of violence and then staged it as a scene to look like a frantic panic. They highlighted his initial interview with the homicide detective, claiming Benjamin's demeanor wasn't that of a confused sleepwalker, but of a guilty young man trying desperately to control the narrative. They pointed to the weapon itself, a survival knife. It wasn't something lying loosely on a nightstand. It had to be sought out. It required intent to wield. Now, the prosecution's narrative was clean, logical, and deeply compelling. To the average person sitting in a jury box, sleepwalking is something funny and you see in cartoons. And the idea that someone could act out a violent, highly targeted murder in their sleep sounded less like science and more like science fiction. Now, with the digital timeline stacked heavily against them, the defense brought out their secret weapon, Dr. Gerald Simmons, a renowned neurologist and triple board certified sleep disorder expert. When Dr. Simmons was first approached by Benjamin's defense attorneys, Gary Hart and Wes Rucker, he was deeply skeptical. He had seen his fair share of criminals trying to use medical anomalies to escape justice. But Dr. Simmons wasn't interested in theories, he wanted data. He admitted Benjamin into a specialized sleep clinic and conducted 2 comprehensive high-tech sleep study. The teenager was hooked up to a complex web of machines and wires to monitor his brainwaves and to track his muscle activity, and high-definition infrared cameras to watch his every move in the dark. What Dr. Simmons discovered inside Benjamin's brain chemistry had shocked him. The data revealed that Benjamin didn't sleep like a normal teenager. His brain possessed an extreme psychological predisposition to plunge incredibly fast into what is known as slow-wave sleep, the exact stage of deep sleep where sleepwalking, night terrors, and confusional arousal occur. While a normal person might take an hour or more to transition through the lighter phases of sleep before reaching this deep slow wave state, Benjamin's brain could bypass the security checkpoints and dive straight into the deep end within minutes of closing his eye. Dr. Simmons later testified that the 24 minutes window of phone inactivity was not an argument against sleepwalking. It was actually a textbook window for it, because when a person is severely sleep deprived, as Benjamin clearly was, from the hours of late night phone scrolling, the brain's drive for deep slow wave sleep becomes overwhelmingly intense. It's a phenomenon called sleep rebound. The moment Benjamin finally put his phone down to rest, his exhausted brain slammed into a profound chaotic state of deep sleep. But also because of his severe parasomnia, his brain did not transition cleanly. It fractured. The cortex, the most important part of the brain responsible for conscious thought and awareness, remained completely dormant, locked in a heavy sleep state, while the motor pathways that control walking, gasping, and movement woke up entirely. Dr. Simmons later explained to the stunned courtroom that during these episodes, a sleepwalker is essentially a biological automation. They can navigate familiar environments, open doors, and even handle complex tools like knives, because these actions are hardwired into their procedural memory. To them, they aren't thinking that they are executing routines embedded in the primitive parts of the brain. Dr. Simmons clearly stated that Benjamin had definitely killed his sister on the record, and there was no question about it, but he did not do this voluntarily. There was no motivation, there was no conscious mind behind the blade. The defense argued that Benjamin was trapped in a horrific night terror. In his unconscious mind, he wasn't attacking his beloved twin sister, he was just defending himself against a perceived threat, a monster, or an obstacle in a vivid, forgotten dream. He only snapped awake when the intense physical feedback of the act, the sound, and the sudden shock or the physical contact shattered the sleep state, leaving him standing in a real-life horror movie. Now, as bizarre as this Elliot case might sound, it is not without precedent, because to be found guilty in a crime like murder, the legal system requires 2 distinct elements: the guilty act and the guilty mind. If a person lacks the conscience to commit an action, they cannot be held criminally responsible any more than a person who suffers an unexpected heart attack behind the wheel can be charged with murder if the car veers into the sidewalk. The most famous historical benchmark of this defense occurred in Toronto, Canada in 1987, when a 23-year-old man named Kenneth Parks got out of his bed, drove his car at an incredible 14 miles across town, entered the home of his in-laws and brutally attacked them. He strangled his father-in-law until the man was unconscious and used a tire iron to beat his mother-in-law to death. Immediately after the assault, Parks drove directly to a nearby police station covered in blood and cried out to the officers, saying, "I think I just killed some people." After which, medical and sleep experts heavily evaluated Parks. They discovered he had extraordinary history of severe sleepwalking condition related to stress and anxiety. The data also proved later on that his brain waves during sleep were profoundly abnormal. The Canadian Supreme Court ultimately acquitted Kenneth Parks of all charges, ruling that he was in a state of non-insane automatism. He walked out of court a free man, a medical anomaly which had killed with a conscious mind. A similar case had occurred in North Carolina, where a father named Joseph Mitchell was accused of strangling his child to death. He claimed he was completely asleep during this event, trapped in a severe parasomnia episode brought on by extreme stress and sleep deprivation. Now, just like Parks, Mitchell was also found not guilty by the jury, who believed that the neurological science over the sheer of horror of the act. Now, the Elliott's defense team pointed directly to these legal milestones. They argued that Benjamin was no different than Kenneth Parks or Joseph Mitchell. He was a victim of his own biology, a young man who would have gladly given his own life to save Meghan, but was betrayed by a fatal flaw in his neurological hardwiring. But prosecutors in Texas were quick to draw a line in the sand. Every sleepwalking case is unique, and the digital realities of 2021 were vastly different from the forensic capabilities of 1987. The state hammered home the terrifying alternative. If the jury bought this defense based on 24 minutes window, they were opening a dangerous backdoor for any clever killer to claim that they were simply unconscious during their worst atrocities. In February 2025, the trial of Benjamin Elliott reached its emotional and gut-wrenching conclusion inside a packed Houston courtroom. The dynamics of the courtroom were completely upside down. Usually in a murder trial, the family of a victim sits behind the prosecution, glaring at the defendant, demanding the maximum sentence under the law. But in this courtroom, Michael and Katy Elliott sat directly behind the defense table. They had already lost their beautiful daughter Meghan. The empty chair at their dinner table was out permanent, agonizing reminder of that horrific September morning. Now they were facing with the real prospect of losing their remaining child, their son, to a life sentence in a maximum security prison. They didn't want him to be prosecuted. They didn't believe that he was a monster either. They believed the science, and they believe in the deep love their twins had shared. During the closing arguments, the defense also pleaded with the jury to see the case through the lens of a medical tragedy. If this can happen to the Elliots, they want, quoting Katy Elliott's own fears, it can happen to anybody with a severe undiagnosed sleep disorder. But the prosecution's focus remained razor sharp on the physical reality of the crime. A 17-year-old girl was dead in her own bed, her life cut short by a brutal knife wound inflicted by the person who should have protected her the most. They also later on argued that the digital timeline, the nature of the weapon, and the sheer mechanics of the assault pointed towards an intentional act that no amount of sleep studies could fully explain away. The jury deliberated for hours, weighing the complex and conflicting worlds of digital timelines and advanced neurological science. When they finally fled back into the courtroom, the tension was suffocating. The verdict was finally announced: guilty for murder. The jury did not buy into the sleepwalking defense, whether they believed Benjamin was fully awake and motivated by some hidden malice, or whether they simply couldn't accept that a 24-minute window was enough time to commit an unconscious murder. They found him criminally responsible for Meghan's death. And what happened next proved just how deeply conflicted the jury truly was. Benjamin Elliott faced up to 99 years or life in prison, but after handing down the guilty verdict, the jury took the unprecedented step of formally asking the judge for extreme leniency. It was a clear sign that while they felt bound by the legal definition of the evidence to find him guilty, they recognized the agonizing, tragic, nuance of the case. They knew this wasn't a typical cold-blooded killer. The judge listened. Benjamin Elliott was sentenced to 15 years in prison. For Benjamin, now an adult, the next decade and a half of his life will be spent behind bars, a convicted murderer. But the true prison is one he will never escape, regardless of when he is paroled. He has to live every single day with the conscious knowledge of what his unconscious hands did during those critical 24 minutes. Now, the case of Benjamin Elliott stands as a chilling, permanent reminder of the terrifying, fragile nature of human consciousness. It forces us to look into the dark mirror of our own minds and ask a question that shakes the very foundation of our identity. When we close our eyes and drift off to sleep, who is really in control of the body we leave behind? Now, thank you so much guys for watching this deep dive into one of the most tragic medical mysteries in recent legal history. I'll see you guys on the next case. Bye for now and take care.